The Browns defense has kind of been one of the more dominating talking points so far this season for the Cleveland Browns. Sure, the offense looked good against Cincinnati, but let's talk about this defense. Everything looked bad against Baltimore, but specifically, let's talk about this defense. It's been something that Browns fans have fixated on for good reason. It is not good. It has not been good throughout 2 weeks. So what I want to ask today is this all doom and gloom, or do these problems have easy in-house solutions for this defense? Well, let's talk about it. Real quick before I do this deep dive into the defense, I want to make sure you guys hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload a ton of coverage for the Cleveland Browns and the NFL in general coming out. So if you want to make sure you don't miss a single thing from that, hit that subscribe button and ding that notification bell. So when you look at the Browns defense as a total problem, you got to dissect it into different areas and figure out where the problem actually lies. So the first place you will look at, and from what this team did last year, the obvious place you would look at is, again, this would seem like the likely culprit. This team was awful against the run without Myles Garrett last year. They weren't even great with Myles Garrett. They played two run-heavy teams, or two teams that are really good if they are run-heavy, in Baltimore and Cincinnati. Joe Mixon, Lamar Jackson, Mark Ingram. Those are all good running backs. So you would expect that this might be where the Browns' struggles are, right? Getting gashed, getting torn up on the run, but not really, because despite having two really solid run offense opponents throughout the first 2 weeks, the Browns have actually been one of the better, yes, one of the better run defense teams in the NFL. Now, that might have to do with the other issue that this Browns defense has, so teams just aren't trying to run as much because you can have to pass all day. But nonetheless, this Browns team has not given up that many yards on the ground. They've given up the 8th fewest rushing yards in the NFL and only have given up 89.5 yards a game, which is actually pretty good and a pretty vast improvement from last year. Even with Myles Garrett, it was around 120. Without, it was like 140. So massive difference there when it comes to run defense. So I don't really think this is where the problem is. And it's actually been one of the strongest units on the Browns' entire roster. All 5 of the Browns' highest graded defenders via PFF are all defensive linemen. By the way, none of those guys are Olivier Vernon, which is kind of a concern, but that's something for later. So the defensive line has actually been pretty good, full stop, and they've been really good against the run with even somebody like Sione Taki. Taki, who might be a part of the problem, is actually a part of the solution when it comes to run defense because he's really good out there, 75 grade out there. So obviously, it's not the front line. It's not the run defense that's the issue with the defense. It is clearly. Now, the pass coverages on this team have been a mess, but they've been a mess for a lot of different reasons, in my opinion. The first reason is camp injuries. Not camp shortness, but camp injuries. I think the camp injuries set this team back a good 2 to 4 weeks. Here's why. When you look at this team, especially when they're in zone, it's a mess. There's a lack of chemistry, communication, and overall collective IQ as a unit. They don't really trade off zones well. They don't know who's going to take responsibility where. It's just overall kind of a Wild West show when the Browns go back there and try to run a zone to contain some things. Somebody always messes up. These DBs don't trust each other. Why is that? It's because none of these DBs have played with each other. Like the current alignment of Browns defensive backs that is playing the first 2 weeks of the season didn't really practice that much with each other during training camp, which is a massive problem. And it carried into the regular season. You could see it clearly in the scrimmage and then clearly the first 2 weeks of the season that this was going to be an issue, that the secondary did not have enough time to be ready for the start of the season. But that's not the Browns' only problem. It's not just communication, because if it was, that would be fixed probably in a few weeks. That's not the issue. The bigger issue, in my opinion, is that when this Browns team drops into pass coverage, they have what I like to call a Bermuda Triangle of bad coverage, right? Where good coverage goes to disappear and it never comes back again. Those 3 players that make up this triangle are Carl Joseph, B.J. Goodson, and Tavier Thomas. Now, Carl Joseph, I'm going to give a pass here because him and Sadejo haven't been great, but they've been having to make up for a lot of bad chemistry when this team is in zone. So I don't think they've been necessarily the biggest part of the problem. I think if you surround them with better pieces, you actually kind of can elevate those guys and be fine with them. The big parts of the problem, the meat of the issue, is B.J. Goodson and Tavier Thomas. Those two are a massive issue with this secondary. If you don't believe me, that's fine, but let me read you their combined stat line. These two players, just these two players on the 11-man front, have been targeted 28 times through 2 games and have allowed 24 completions. Yes, that's 86%. 28 times, 2 games, 24 completions. That's one, awful, and 2, teams know it, and teams are definitely trying to exploit it. Like, that's obvious. They've also given up 231 yards and 3 touchdowns. And again, 86% passing. The passer rating is insane against those 2 guys. All you have to do if you play the Cleveland Browns is drop back and target 20 and 93. You'll be fine 86% of the time. That's a massive, massive leak. These 2 players on the entire defense make up for almost half of the passing yards that the Browns have given up all season. These 2 players, B.J. Goodson and Tavier Thomas, alone have allowed more passing production than the entire Indianapolis Colts defense. Think about that. 2 players have given up more production throughout 2 weeks than an entire defensive unit. It's a very good defensive unit, but still, that's bad. And when you have a hole that big and that wide and specifically concentrated, because let's also remember that Tavier Thomas plays the slot and B.J. Goodson is a linebacker. So when those 2 players in concert are awful, that leaves a massive, massive hole in the middle of the defense, which is why if you watch Lamar Jackson or if you watch Joe Burrow in the last 2 weeks, they have tore up the Browns specifically in that area, because that is where the Bermuda Triangle of this defense is. It's where coverage just disappears and people just teleport and are wide open. It's because of these 2 players. You have a specific area of your zone that allows 86% of its passes to get by them. That is not winning football. I don't care how good the defensive line is. There's always going to be a safety blanket. There's always going to be somebody open. There's always going to be somebody to throw the ball to. There's always going to be something to negate what your defensive line has done, which has actually been what's happened throughout the first 2 weeks of this season. And if you look at the biggest problem the Browns had against the Cincinnati Bengals was that they could not get off the field on 3rd and 4th down. The reason they couldn't get off the field on 3rd and 4th down is because any team knows that push come to shove, if you need a few yards, you can attack the slot and you can attack the linebacker, and they're both gonna give it up real easy. Tavier Thomas specifically, the starting slot corner of this defense right now because of injuries, has given up 93% of his targets. He's the slot corner. Do you realize how bad that is for short yardage situations, that your slot corner is giving up over 90% of the passes thrown in his direction? That's why the Browns can't get off the field. That's why the Browns can't get home on any of these pressures. It's because Tavier Thomas and B.J. Goodson have in tandem been one of the worst combos of linebacker and slot corner almost in NFL history through 2 weeks. It's been that bad. So I've talked enough about what the problem is, specifically what the problem is, 20 and 93. Is there a solution? So the answer to that question, is there a clear solution, is kind of a yes and no, because again, I don't think this is going to be fixed by trading for some big name or signing another free agent or getting more new guys into the secondary that's already struggling to communicate in the first place. Like, that's one problem the Browns have. The other problem the Browns have is this massive hole with Tavierre Thomas and BJ Goodson. Like, it's a two-tier issue, right? The communication's bad. That's going to take about a month to fix. And then you have this massive hole, which really prevents your defense from looking decent at best. For one part of that solution, there is a clear and immediate answer coming within the system itself, right? Because Tavierre, who I would say is the biggest problem on the defense, who has been the biggest issue, and it's kind of concerning that Ronnie Harrison can't see more snaps behind Tavierre Thomas at this point if Tavierre has been this bad. But nonetheless, there's going to be solutions available to fill Tavierre's role. And that solution is either going to be Kevin Johnson coming back from injury or Greedy Williams returning to the team. The reason why any of those things can solve the Browns' problem is because it will give them a better solution at the slot corner spot. So let's theoretically talk about next week's game. Next week, the Browns play the Washington football team, and they start Terry McLaurin. That's their best wide receiver. He plays a lot in the slot. It would be a massive, massive disaster if Tavierre Thomas was the one covering Terry McLaurin ever in that game. The way you can avoid that from happening is if Greedy Williams comes back, you can have Greedy and Terrence Mitchell play the outside and then let Denzel Ward play inside slot because he can do that. He's done that before. Or Kevin Johnson can come back and take over at the slot because I'm pretty sure Kevin Johnson with no liver is much better than Tavierre Thomas in coverage. Tavierre, pretty good in run defense, terrible in coverage. So if you get Kevin Johnson back or Greedy Williams back, this problem can solve itself pretty easily. That's good because it's the biggest problem on this defense. But the BJ Goodson problem, well, that's a little bit more complicated because BJ and Malcolm Smith are the only veterans on this team. BJ is the only one who's been through the entire offseason program. Everybody else is within their first 2 years in the NFL, so they can't really handle the brunt of the responsibilities of being the main linebacker. Mack Wilson might have been in the spot to do this if he had stayed healthy throughout camp, but the fact that he's missed the entire camp and he's on a brace still, and you still don't know how many snaps you can give him means that he can't really take that load just yet. The reason this is a problem is because this defense, communication-wise, is structured to go through BJ Goodson. You're already having enough problems with communication, so you don't want to make it worse by putting in a new green dot when you don't have any veterans on this defense to begin with. And that means that the current green dot, BJ Goodson, can't really leave the field. And the solution to fixing BJ Goodson's hole when it comes to pass defense is taking BJ Goodson off the field, quite frankly. So he can't come off the field, which means that hole is going to exist. You can mitigate it. You can make it not as big of a deal by putting more DBs out there. And as more DBs get healthy, if Kevin Johnson and Greedy can get back, that will help solve the problem a little bit. It will plug the hole, but it will not go away. The tight end's going to be open this year. That is what it is. Maybe you see more snaps from Malcolm Smith, who's actually been pretty solid in coverage, but as long as BJ Goodson's out there, you can't really hide him. Teams are going to try to target him and take advantage of him, and he's BJ Goodson. This is one of the limitations of him being BJ Goodson, is that he's not great in coverage. He'll help you out in run defense, but he's not going to be great in coverage. So you're just going to have to deal with that one. You're going to hope that once you get healthy with the DBs, that can help out with the thing. But Mack Wilson coming back from injury isn't really going to solve this problem because Mack Wilson's just going to take snaps away from Malcolm Smith and Sione Takitaki. And given how up and down Mack Wilson's grades were last year in coverage specifically, and also how good Takitaki and Malcolm Smith have been throughout the first 2 weeks of this season, I don't know if Mack Wilson coming back is really going to have much of an impact at all. Because again, you can't really take BJ Goodson off the field. And the only way you're going to be able to get Mack Wilson on the field without taking off one of your better linebackers is if you play more linebackers, and that's just not a solution that we're going to even think about. That's more linebackers is not going to be the answer for the Cleveland Browns. So you're just going to have to put more DBs out there and just make that hole that BJ Goodson maintains on this defense as inconsequential and as small as possible. So that's the solution. More DBs and get Tavierre Thomas out of there, specifically on second, third, and fourth down. Again, that's just what the situation is. That's what's happened throughout the first 2 weeks. Javier Thomas, 93% completion percentage on him, 2 touchdowns. You just can't have that. Limiting the situations in which he sees the field would be key to the Browns' success in stopping and getting off the field on third and fourth down. So look for one of those DBs coming back to make a huge difference in that area. And look for, regardless of what happens with those 2 DBs, to see the Browns try to put Denzel Ward in the slot more often this week, or just follow Terry McLaurin, because that's going to be an issue. But I'll get into that in the preview later this week. One, I want to make sure expectations are completely clear and that I'm not miscommunicating anything. When I talk about this Browns defense, it is understood that this, under no circumstance, is a top 10 defense. You would be very lucky if you're the Cleveland Browns to have a top 15 defense. That would be a miracle almost, and that would be very good. The goal is to have a 15 to 20 defense. If you have a 15th to 20th ranked defense, you'll be fine. The offense is going to be good enough. You'll get off the field on enough third downs, and the defense won't be a big issue. The problem is right now the Browns have been a bottom 5 defense. And sure, you can beat some teams with a bottom 5 defense, but you aren't necessarily throwing out Patrick Mahomes and Tyreek Hill out there on a weekly basis. So you need to have a better defense than that to win 10 games in this league. That being said, do I believe that the solutions that the Browns have on the roster right now will be enough to get to that level? Absolutely. The biggest hole and the most egregious hole on the entire defense is that slot corner spot. It's egregious. It's bad. I don't know how it's gotten to this point. Well, I do know there's nobody there to play that role because everybody else got injured. All your slot options for this team got hurt. Remember, Grant Delpit was supposed to be the slot to begin this. He got hurt. Then it was Kevin Johnson. He got hurt. Then, hey, maybe you could put Greedy Williams outside, play Terrence Mitchell, and then have Denzel Ward go out and play the slot. And then Greedy got hurt, so Denzel has to play outside. So all 3 of your decent to very good slot options went away. You don't have them anymore. And you were left with Javier Thomas. Ronnie Harrison can play the slot, but again, he just got on the team like a week or 2 ago. So no, those weren't going to be solutions available for the Browns. They had to throw Javier out there. Now it's looking like they don't have to. And the less they have to put Javier out there on second and third and fourth down, they'll be fine. If it's just run stopping, he can do that really well. He grades out pretty well as a run defender from that cornerback position. But when it comes to coverage, he's been awful. Plugging that hole and fixing that issue will mean a lot for this Browns defense. It will turn some of those pressures back into sacks. It will help them do a lot more with this defense, and it will help them get off the field on third and fourth down, which they could not do against Baltimore, and they absolutely could not do against Cincinnati. Filling that hole and then having more of your DBs come back to support BJ Goodson will also do enough for this defense that I believe they will be able to tread water and float around that 15th to 20th ranking as far as defenses go, which will be enough for this Browns team to win a good amount of games this year. Again, you're not going to have a shutdown defense. Those opportunities passed you by in the offseason. Jadeveon Clowney did not want to sign here. You could not swing a trade for Jamal Adams. Having those 2 players would have fixed a majority of the problems on the Browns defense because those are 2 superstar players. You cannot get those players. It's not for lack of trying. The price was either too high or the guy didn't want to come here. You couldn't get those solutions, so you were left with this team. And this team's fine. This defense is fine. It's a middling defense, not a great defense. You can win games with this defense. I expect once Greedy comes back, I expect once Kevin Johnson specifically comes back, that a lot of this stuff will change and that you'll see less and less of guys who aren't in optimal situations be put out of those spots. BJ Goodson shouldn't have to cover as much ground as he has to right now, and Javier Thomas just should not be the starting slot on an NFL team. So fixing those 2 roles and supporting those 2 roles will do a lot for this Browns defense going forward. The communication, That's still going to take time. That's a separate issue. That's going to take more and more time the more times you tinker with this defense. But eventually the communication stuff will cease to become a problem. But for the next 4 or 5 weeks, expect this defense to be frustrating. Expect them to make some teams look better than they are. Don't expect you're going to shut anybody out, because these issues are still pretty big with the Browns defense. The communication specifically worries me. Big plays worry me with this defense. But again, nobody should have expected this defense to be that. And the real question Browns fans need to ask about this defense, the important questions that the Browns defense needs to answer are, can you get off the field on third downs? And can you force a couple of field goals out of scoring drives a game? If you can do those two things, the offense should carry the load enough to be able to win a decent amount of games this year. So overall, my conclusion is making some of these small adjustments will actually do a lot for this defense and do a lot for them in two key areas, which is forcing field goals and getting off the field on third down. So that's kind of where I'm at with this defense. I don't think it's the catastrophe that some people have painted out to be, but it is bad. It is concerning. So that's kind of my thoughts on what's the issue with the Browns defense. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. Do you think it is in that area that I'm pointing at, or do you think it's somewhere else? Let me know in the comment section below. But again, guys, thank you for watching. Have a great day and have a good night.